Donald Trump is using the media again, constantly granting interviews. He's at it again today, saying hugely controversial things again and dominating the coverage once again.
Then you say, well, we got to have mass deportations. That's not going to happen because the 14th Amendment says if you're born here, you're an American and you can't kick Americans out.
Bill, I think you're wrong about the 14th Amendment. And frankly, the whole thing with anchor babies and the concept of anchor babies, I don't think you're right about that.
Trump is schooling people on H-1B visas.
That's true.
It's remarkable.
It's true. And he's saying things about immigration that people are afraid to say.
He seems to have a reading of the 14th Amendment that I can't find anyone else of reasonable mind shares.
With the CNN poll showing Trump trailing Hillary by 6 points in a hypothetical matchup, are some pundits finally taking the Donald seriously? Joining us now from Scottsdale, Arizona, Matt Lewis, senior contributor for the Daily Caller. And in New York, Kelly Goff, a columnist for the Daily Beast. Matt Lewis, Trump's immigration plan, you may not like it. The New York Times and Washington Post editorial pages are ripping it. Once again, the media have to recognize he is touching a deep nerve.
Absolutely, Howie. Look, I think the press, the media still think he's a clown. The difference is now we think he's a clown who very well could be the Republican nominee.
That is quite a sea change. Kelly Goff, Trump told ABC's George Stephanopoulos in a phoner today, who, when pressed about, well, how are you going to implement this mass deportation you talk about? How much will it cost? He just kept saying, it's called management, and you get great people. But every time he does this, whether it's the 14th Amendment or John McCain or the Fox News debate, commentators say he's gone too far, and he winds up going up in the polls.
Right. Well, look, this story reminds me of the fact that I often get asked, particularly by my more conservative friends back in Texas, if there really is liberal bias in media. And I usually have the same reply, which is it's not so much that there's liberal bias as a lot of laziness and what I call follow the leader bias. So what do I mean by that, Howie? Well, 5 years ago, CBS News poll found that at least half of Americans actually support considering ending birthright citizenship. The problem is most people who work in media go to the same dinner parties together, they tweet at each other, and they all seem to kind of think, well, if he thinks that if their outlet's covering it one way, then we must all be covering it a certain way. That becomes a perception. And so this perception took hold that the mainstream perspective is that, you don't end birthright citizenship. And so Trump has tapped into something which actually resonates with half of Americans. The media just has not been responsibly covering it that way. I wrote about this issue, several months ago, Howie, and got all of this backlash, except for in the comments. In the comments, people were saying, this makes sense. Right. Yes.
But Matt, when I watch O'Reilly, going at it with Trump over the 14th Amendment and deportation and so forth, I thought, well, maybe this debate is good for the country.
Yeah. Well, there is that argument. Look, I think there will be a point of diminishing returns where Trumpism could have long-term, long-lasting negative effects on the conservative movement and the Republican Party. But in the short term, there's really no evidence that he's done that. What he has done is really highlighted some important issues that need to be discussed and debated. And we need to acknowledge that there is a schism and a disconnect between what some conservative opinion leaders and media personalities think versus what a lot of average Americans think. I also think Trump has been, aside from being great ratings and great for business, he's also helped humble the press a little bit. We've been wrong so many times about him. He wasn't going to even get in the race to begin with, and then he wasn't actually ever going to file his FEC.
On that point, humble, I would say humiliated. Front page story in today's New York Times. Why Trump won't fold. It took 3 reporters after 3 months, all this time to figure out that this is not some flash in the pan. I would say it was obvious after 2 weeks. Also, I want to mention a Politico headline about the Alabama rally. Trump, Alabama, and the ghost of George Wallace, who, of course, ran for president as a segregationist. That carried, I thought, an unfair implication. And let me play a soundbite for you, Kelly Goff, of MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell setting up a segment about the Donald.
Coming up, why some people are now turning to psychiatry for the answer to the question, what's wrong with Donald Trump?
Isn't that classic condescension by the media elite?
Well, except for the fact that even his supporters will tell you that he often says things that most people agree you're not supposed to say out loud. That doesn't mean that they don't enjoy hearing it. So
he needs psychiatric analysis?
Maybe he needs
Is that right?
Maybe he needs a better media coach. I don't know. Lawrence O'Donnell was having some fun at the expense of the Donalds. He's not going to be the last reporter to do so. But the fact of the matter is we're all being entertained in part because he says these things that we all consider crazy. I mean, that's part of what's his appeal, Howie.
Well, I wouldn't say we all consider crazy. I mean, sometimes he's over the top, and sometimes, obviously, he has things that have catapulted him to the top of the GOP field. Matt Lewis, you've written that much of the public and the conservative movement of which you are a part is falling for demagoguery in the case of Trump. But the guy's done now 68 national TV interviews, more in print, more online. If you're right, why isn't that obvious to everyone? Why is it that you see demagoguery and a lot of people still like the guy?
Well, look, there's a reason why demagogues are populist,
Right.
why they're popular. I mean, the George Wallace reference might be over the top, but there's some element of truth to it. Maybe William Jennings Bryan might have been a better example, or Huey Long might have been a better example. I mean, look, I think that there is a strain of a very angry, populist, not traditionally conservative, thing happening with Donald Trump out there. But having said that, you do have to recognize this is a real phenomenon, and he has tapped into something. And there are a lot of Americans around the country who are saying, finally, someone is saying this. And the fact that he's willing to say things that nobody else wants to say, he's politically incorrect. Again, how many times have we written him off? The McCain gaffe that was supposed to end him.
But just for the record, I haven't written him off, and I've been scolding the media for saying this. And look, the liberal media, Kelly, I mean, the Huffington Post is still sticking to this stunt of saying we're only going to cover Donald Trump in the entertainment section because he's a sideshow, even though he's the clear Republican front runner. The conservative media, and Matt's hardly the only one, is apoplectic about the fact that Donald Trump has kind of taken over the GOP race.
Well, look, what brings to mind to me is that who was that famous governor who said in Louisiana, the only way I won't get elected is if I get caught in bed with a live black boy or a dead white girl? It
wasn't racial, but it was Edward Edwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. He got reelected.
Live girl or a dead boy, yeah.
He got reelected. So, I mean, it's not exactly as though all of us who are covering this have been acting as though our country is above electing people who do and say questionable things. Guess what, America? We're not. I mean, that's kind of what the reality is of this situation, and so we have to cover it accordingly. I mean, we need to start covering it that way. Live boy or a
dead girl. But, you make a good point, and look, like any other candidate, Trump needs media scrutiny, but he has found a remarkable way to thrive despite when the press criticizes him. In fact, he turns that into an asset because he's running not just against the establishment, but against those of us in the news business. Let me get a break. Coming up, is the press too easy on black protesters who stop presidential candidates from speaking? And later, Jeff Bezos says he doesn't recognize the Amazon portrayed in a New York Times investigation, but is that just spin?